Hi, and welcome to Check Your Thread, a podcast about sewing more sustainably. My name's Zoe, and I'm obsessed with sewing. I've been blogging about it for over 13 years and am the creator and host of the popular handmade wardrobe challenge, Me Made May. But like many people, I've become increasingly concerned about the climate crisis and the way my lifestyle contributes to it. So in this podcast, I'll be nerding out about making clothes whilst exploring how to minimise the negative impact that it may have. I really hope you'll join me on this journey. Hi lovely listeners, how are you doing? I'm doing well. I'm largely over my recent bout of hay fever and feeling good, feeling productive. Something cool that happened. Last Sunday, I hosted a fabric and pattern swap at the Fabric Godmother studio in Hove, and it was so much fun! Thank you so much to the awesome people who came along. Lots of fabric and patterns and haberdashery items were redistributed, keeping them in use by rehoming them with someone new. And most importantly, we raised £500 to donate to the Choose Love Ukraine crisis fundraiser, which will provide aid and support to refugees in that area. I hope that any crafting and making you've been up to has been going well and bringing you joy. I've been working on a few smaller projects this week. I finished up the shoulder bag that I made from scraps and leftovers that I mentioned in last week's intro. I'll share that in a couple of weeks as my next Free Pattern Friday blog post. I also made my son a rain hat using the Oliver and S bucket hat pattern. I used a scrap of waxed cotton for the outer and a scrap of cotton twill for the lining. And finally, I've been working on a tracksuit for my daughter using some sweatshirt fleece that's been in my stash for a couple of years. I'm getting a lot of enjoyment through working with pieces of fabric or scraps that have been hanging around for years and turning them into useful stuff that hopefully my family will get lots of use from. Sustainability-wise, as well as passing on some fabric stash and swapping it for some other fabric, I've also been sourcing some more sustainable sewing supplies. I've ordered some 100% biodegradable elastic to use for the waistband of the joggers part of my daughter's tracksuit. I ordered it from a company in the UK called James Tailoring. I haven't ordered from them before, although I have visited their site a number of times while researching various stuff. So I'll let you know what it's like when it arrives and I've actually sewn with it. Whilst I was placing my order, I took the opportunity to make some steps towards my goal of switching to biodegradable threads. So I ordered 4 reels of the Scanfil organic cotton thread in colours that I use a lot. Whilst we're on the topic of reducing our impact, although let's be honest, that topic is never far from discussion on this podcast, I'd like to mention something that I've just posted about on Instagram. Here in the Northern Hemisphere, we're at the beginning of the growing season. So if that's where you live and you're planning to plant some seeds soon, please make sure that you're buying potting compost or soil or other growing medium that does not contain peat. Thankfully, products with peat in are banned in some countries. Please check the law in your country if you don't know. But it won't be banned yet here in the UK until 2024. So basically, in the UK, if you're buying a bag of compost that doesn't explicitly say peat-free, then it will contain peat. So why does this matter? Peat bogs are being destroyed for compost, both for home use and annoyingly for nurseries to grow plants to sell. These peat bogs are ancient habitats and are irreplaceable. They are also fantastic and important carbon sinks. So by destroying them, we are also releasing all that carbon back into the atmosphere and reducing our planet's capacity to deal with excess carbon. So please, peat-free compost. And if your local garden centre doesn't stock it, ask them to stock it and go elsewhere until they do. I've effectively bullied my local hardware store into stocking peat-free alongside their normal compost. So don't think that speaking out is a waste of breath. Shops need to know that there's a market for a new product before they invest in new inventory. There was a bit of a lull last week, but this week I have the pleasure of thanking 3 new patrons of the podcast. Enormous thanks to Heather, Lee and Emily for supporting Check Your Thread via Patreon. If you have enjoyed the podcast so far and want to help new episodes come to you each week, please find the link via the show notes or on the website checkyourthread.com. In a similar vein, I have a favour to ask you this week. If you like this podcast and believe in what I'm trying to do with it, please take a tiny bit of time this week to help it grow. Please take a tiny bit of time this week to help it grow by sharing about it in some way. That could be showing a real-life sewing buddy how to find it in their podcast app. Or if you're part of a sewing or crafting group, could you share a link to the Check Your Thread website via the group's Facebook page or WhatsApp group? Or could you pick your favourite episode and share it via Instagram or something else? I'd be really grateful for any assistance you can give to help the podcast and its message reach more ears. Thank you so much in advance. Okay, let's get cracking with today's episode. We're having a deep dive into sourcing ethical and more sustainable fabrics. I honestly didn't know how little I knew about this topic before I had this conversation with Charlie Bradley Ross. She has been researching this stuff since before most of us even realised there was anything wrong with regular forms of fabric production. She amassed a huge bank of knowledge and contacts, and through that, her company Offset Warehouse was born. Charlie told me all about her journey, and she helpfully offered a beginner's guide to sewers wanting to choose better fabrics, including why we should be wary of the term deadstock. She also got into finding the balance between using what you have and supporting businesses doing good work, plus how she approaches working respectfully with fabric producers and how she'd like overconsumption to be addressed, among other stuff. This is a really informative one. Let's get stuck in. So thank you so much for finding time to talk to me for the podcast. I know, like, emailing back and forth, I know how busy you are, so I really appreciate it.
Yes, no, thank you so much for having me. It's such a pleasure and I'm so pleased.
So let's start, if you wouldn't mind, telling us who you are, where you are, and what fills your days.
Okay, so my name's Charlie Bradley Ross, and I am in Lower Sunbury, beautiful UK. And how do I fill my days? Gosh, so part of my time is filled with my little one. So I'm with her 2 days a work week, and then 3 days I'm working on Offset Warehouse and the Sustainable Fashion Collective.
Amazing. So how do you juggle all that? That's a lot.
Well, I always think I don't juggle as much as a lot of other mums or dads. So actually, I feel like I've got quite a good balance of it all.
It sounds like a nice balance. Brilliant. So if you wouldn't mind, could you give us a whistle-stop tour of your background, please, leading up to when you started your eco and ethical fabric business?
Yes, of course. So I guess that starts when I was doing a degree in fashion design. And one day it was really like a light bulb moment. We were shown this documentary called China Blue, and it basically follows the story of a girl in China who essentially gets kind of trapped into what we now know as slave labor or modern day slavery. And it's sort of like a cycle where people just can't get out of that. And what was really kind of horrifying was the clothing that she was kind of producing. So she was a seamstress for a big company in China, and they were making clothes for people like Levi's and kind of brands that you have heard of and you probably wear. And it suddenly dawned on me that actually people were being exploited in the clothing that we make. And as a fashion designer, and I think as kind of any kind of creative, you want to create things that are beautiful kind of inherently. So not just, at the end product, but throughout the whole journey, like the whole process of creating something with your bare hands is so unbelievably beautiful. Thought of having a fabric that might have exploited somebody or caused some negative impact was so awful. I just didn't want to be part of that. And so that was when I, said, okay, I'm going to make sure that I'm not exploiting somebody like this has been happening, in the clothes that I may have been buying already. And the process was so difficult to find fabrics that I knew where they had come from. Yeah. And I could say I knew what the fiber was and that the fiber was manufactured ethically and was a sustainable fiber. All of those things were so challenging. I had basically ended up doing this whole load of research, so sort of 3 years worth of research into suppliers and fabric manufacturers that I could verify where they were and that they really believed in the products that they were producing and the people who were producing them. So at the end of that process, I put all of my research online because I was like, I've got these huge files of research and it's just for me at the moment. I need to be able to share this. And that was when I realized that a lot of other designers were having the same kind of realization. Right. And I started getting lots of inquiries about, this fabric, how do I get it? And it quickly just sort of grew into a business, which I hadn't really intended. And so that was the start of what is now called Offset Warehouse.
Amazing.
And so originally I wasn't going to be a fabric shop, and that wasn't really what I had planned on doing. But eventually the inquiries were coming in so quickly. It was one of those moments when my now husband turned to me and said, I think you should probably just hold some of this stock somewhere, because
Right.
so many questions. You'll have an aneurysm just trying to deal with all of this.
Yeah.
So, yeah, and that was how it was born, really.
That's amazing. That sounds very organic.
Yes.
So when did it start, and kind of how has it evolved?
Yes, so that was actually 10 years ago. So we had our 10-year anniversary last year, and it's really evolved quite kind of drastically. So I guess when we first started out, no one really was talking about ethical fabrics.
I was going to say 10 years ago, there wasn't much discussion within the sewing community, at least, about sourcing eco fabrics.
Yeah. And so I guess it was quite kind of, I want to say niche. It was quite kind of specialist, I suppose, and so it was a relatively small thing. And now, of course, the landscape is much bigger. There's been a lot more awareness raising of not just, the garments that are produced, because there's a lot of kind of talk about that, but also, now in the sewing community, it's about who made my fabrics, not just who made, the clothes that I'm buying. So that's changed a lot, which means that, we've grown quite substantially. We started originally almost as like an agent between the factories and the kind of hand weaving communities that we work with now, to holding a lot of stock in several warehouses. On top of that, there's been a huge growth in terms of the materials, so the access to materials and the different fibers that are coming through. And it's kind of funny because we're sort of seeing almost like we're going backwards. Right. So whereas we started with all these kind of really high-tech, amazing fabrics and fibers, we're now like, well, actually, the hemps and the linens were pretty good. So they're eco-friendly. Should we go back to those? And so it's nice in that way.
That's really interesting. So how involved are you in the product development?
Yeah, it depends. So we work with quite a broad selection of different producers. And so some are kind of like really big weaving mills, and they're really set up for the Western market and our kind of tastes and aesthetics, especially in the colours and things. Mm-hmm. But when we work with more kind of hand weaving communities, we might specify more about, something that's going to be more on trend next year, or changing up quality. So maybe the weights or the patterns, things like that. But yeah, I mean, not too much, to be honest, trying to keep it as original as possible, really.
Yeah. That's really interesting. Oh, so many questions have come from that. But okay, I'm going to start with what I've got. Okay. So it's interesting. So you're talking about how you're working with these different kind of suppliers. So how much of your business is wholesale to garment manufacturers compared to kind of home sewers like myself?
That's a good question. So we're probably, I'd say now we're probably 50-50 actually.
Interesting.
And so we have obviously a retail side, so that's all through our online shop, and that's where we sell to home sewers predominantly, and then for the wholesale side, we're really dealing more with lifestyle shops and fashion brands, so smaller fashion brands, interior designers, and things like costume designers.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So, and that's been a really nice, kind of.
I wouldn't have predicted that.
Well, the costume design industry is really gearing up more towards more sustainable production, because they make, a lot of things for one kind of event, and then maybe don't use it anymore, or can't use it again. So there's a lot of kind of hiring of the garments, but now they're looking more at what other fabrics going into the garments as well, which has been a really nice shift.
Awesome, that's really exciting. So let's go back to basics. So what would you say makes one fabric more sustainable or ethical than another?
That's a really good question. So for Offset Warehouse, our kind of principle is that something is ethical if it benefits the environment, benefits the people who make it, or yourself. So, for example, if it's made with chemicals that, aren't carcinogenic, that is more ethical than a non-ethical fabric. But I think if anyone has kind of started looking at this area, it can get quite overwhelming quite quickly, because you get trapped into this cycle of looking for the perfect fabric that has the least impact on all three of those areas. And that's really, really challenging, because there really isn't one kind of golden bullet fabric that kind of covers all of those criteria. So that's why I always kind of say, if your choice has hit any of those areas, then it's a step in the right direction. So you should feel good about the fact that you've made that choice over something that wasn't. For example, an organic cotton jersey is a much better choice than just a cotton jersey. Kind of steps like that.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I think that kind of mirrors a lot of what I try and think about and talk about with the podcast. Is like I'm trying to talk about sewing more sustainably, because there is no such thing as sewing sustainably, because any activity pretty much in life that uses power, uses resources, cannot claim to be sustainable. It sounds like you've come to a similar kind of awareness with fabric also.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. I mean, as a designer, that was how I always operated was, I want to make this outfit. What is the most ethical, responsible, sustainable way that I can do it? And so that leaves you with quite a broad kind of range of different ways to be sustainable. And a lot of designers or creatives are, only work with organic certifications or fair trade certifications. But with Offset Warehouse, we're really broad. So we might be doing a lot of like recycled fibers, which aren't necessarily organic. So trying to keep things balanced and also offer a variety of ways that you can minimize impact.
Yeah. Okay, so generally speaking, how can we tell what kind of damage our fabrics have caused or what conditions our fabrics were produced in? Because it seems very difficult as a consumer of fabric to find any knowledge about, unless we're going specifically to a website such as yours that have done the research for us. Generally speaking, do we have any clue?
That's a good question. I guess I'd have to think back to when I was looking for fabrics, the sorts of things I might look for. So I guess I would start with either looking at the fiber. So there are fibers that are kind of more inherently sustainable than other ones. So things like synthetic, nylon is not that ethical, it's not that environmentally friendly. But, if you were working with a linen, for example, or a hemp, flax, jute, that kind of fiber, that's already, a good step. And then if you can see anything along kind of the certifications route, so if there's anything like organic certification or fair trade, that's a really good thing to look for. And that's something that you can then feel, assured that it's reputable resource or source. And I'd also look at the company in terms of any certifications that they have for their own workforce. So, do they have any standards, so social standards, which generally are like ISO?
Thank you for those tips. What would you like home garment sewers to consider when they source their fabrics for their projects?
That's such a lovely question. I think, to be honest, just thinking about this is such a huge step. I think the fact that you're raising awareness through this podcast, and I hear so many more, sewers are interested in this area, is such a huge thing already. To just think about what is it that I'm going to use for my next project, and can I hit any of those criteria? Could I choose something that's more ethical in some way, is a really good start. And I think there's a lot to be said as well for using what you've got as well. That's probably one of the biggest things that we say is, please try and use what exists already. Said that, I will use your platform to spread a little awareness around companies that are selling their offcuts. This is a bit of a bugbear of mine, where originally it was a really amazing idea to stop things from heading to landfill. Like, that's the whole thing. That's the idea, is to minimize the waste, because when things head to landfill, that's where actually one of the biggest contributors to global warming is when we just throw things away. Being able to reclaim something is hugely important. But I'm now seeing it as kind of like it's almost like a hall pass, I stopped this from going to landfill, so that makes it sustainable. And I'm afraid we're now at the point where that kind of doesn't cut it anymore. And we're almost now feeding into the companies who don't want to buy sustainably, the companies who don't want to use ethical fibers, so organic or fair trade fibers, for example, and they just keep buying rubbish. and then we buy what they've got left over of it. It's kind of not good enough anymore. And actually, I would like it if we stopped giving them our money,
Yeah. Are we talking about deadstock fabric?
Yeah, that's what I'm talking about. Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah, I agree. I do feel that is a phrase that kind of gets bandied around a little bit to justify. I mean, I have a small amount of experience of working in the clothing industry, and I know that there's so much overproduction literally built into the process, built into the industry. And to be able to often even get bursaries, there are some financial gains to be had for selling off your leftover fabric. So you think, well, what's then encouraging those businesses from only requesting a decent amount of fabric to complete their order? Like, where's the benefit there? Like, is
no incentive?
Yeah, that's the word, incentive. Thank you.
And actually, we made that decision with the company. So we used to sell people's dead stock and, stopping things from going to landfill. But a few years ago now, we realized actually this is just giving our approval that it's okay to have dead stock, and it's not okay, And if it's like, well, actually, if it was dead stock of organic cotton, that's another thing completely, because that's an ethical textile, and I'm very pleased to take dead stock of that. But I'm not interested in keeping on encouraging this kind of, this oversupply.
Yeah. And often those kind of fabrics, also they're ones that have not got a very good kind of end of life situation happening as well. So just the overproduction and the encouraging of the overproduction of those kind of fibers is just a lose, apart from the people that are getting the money for it.
Yeah.
So what are your favorite fabrics that you stock?
Oh my gosh, you know what? We have this kind of running joke in the team that when we find new fabrics, someone will ping it over and they'll say, "Oh, Charlie, this one's going to make you cry."
Well, really? So what fits those criteria then?
Oh my gosh, there are some fabrics that just make me want to cry because they're so beautiful. Generally, the hand wovens, generally an ikat.
Soft spot for an ikat.
Oh, I've got such a soft spot, you don't even know. And I think just looking at something that's been entirely made by hand, even the yarns have been spun by hand.
Right.
There's some, even talking about it, I am going to cry because I just think it's so beautiful. And, there are a couple of, hand weaving communities, when they email with their latest collection or, their newest creations, I'm always like, oh my gosh, can't wait to open this email and see what's in here. Yeah, so those are probably my favorites. And I think amongst those, I love interesting fibers and kind of unusual things. So like we've got a few kind of banana and pineapple fabrics, like silks. And again, it's just this kind of resourcefulness. So there's the one that I'm thinking of is sourced from the Philippines. And it's just one of those things where they have excess leaves, from the production of pineapples and bananas. And they've just made this beautiful industry out of collecting all of these materials that would otherwise just decompose. And again, like this process of hand processing everything. And there's something so special about it. And it's really, again, like we kind of talked about it earlier, but it's something kind of really old-fashioned about it. It's like, oh, you know what, let's just forget all the machinery, let's just forget the fast pace, and let's just think about this really beautiful slow process. And then I think through the Sustainable Fashion Collective, we get to talk to a lot of people who are doing some amazing things with fibers and fabrics. And I mean, it's kind of annoying because they're basically building these fantastically interesting, incredible products to solve this horrific nightmare that we've created from like overproduction and overconsumption. And they've come up with these incredible solutions. So it's kind of like a funny, kind of weird contrast there. But so, for example, this female-led company who managed to create a fiber from carbon dioxide. So, yeah, I know. And my brain just explodes when I talk to these women and you're like, wow, you're like really, saving the planet and creating fabrics. I mean, that's like the dream for me.
Tick.
Yes. And all females. Yes. So, it's like, people like that who are just so passionate about what they do, and it's really inspiring. And I love kind of fabrics and products like that. Unfortunately, fabrics like that are so early stage, you can't actually get hold of them and you can't use them, but the principles behind these things are just phenomenal. And another company who's doing things like shredding the fabrics and the clothing that we have and remaking it into fiber, just again stop those clothing heading to landfill. But they're kind of breaking the boundary of what historically we've never been able to do before, and really trying to solve these really big problems for us. And so those are really exciting for me as well.
Yeah, definitely. What I'm going to say now is going to sound so juvenile, but I love the denims on your website.
Me too.
I just like to want to strike my screen. There's almost like some inconsistencies in the weave, and it's so beautiful.
Yes, I know. And it's so nice that you appreciate those, because that's taken a lot as well, actually, because people are often so used to, a denim by the yard or by the meter that's like been machine woven, and then you find a hand woven thing. And sometimes, materials end up in our shop and they've got like bits of like hay in them, because they've just been woven in the garden next to the hay bale, and that, a bit of a hay, and so
oh wow,
having to like explain,
there may be hay in your fabric.
Yes, and that's part of the joy of this fabric.
So you raised something earlier where you were saying about how it is a more ethical approach to also see what you've got in terms of materials for home sewing projects. So as a business owner who obviously requires people to buy fabric to exist, how do you marry that up? How do you find a balance between those messages, between please buy these lovely ethical and more sustainable fabrics, and also use what you've got, please?
Use what you've got. Yeah, it's a really good question. Fortunately, the size of the textile market is so big, using up what you've got is not going to affect those sales, thankfully. So I can still tell you to please use what you've got and then come back and buy something responsibly when you need to.
Yeah, I suppose it helps as well that not your entire business is solely about home sewing as well. You have got the wholesale side.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, exactly. So it might be a different situation if we were just talking to home sewers, but yeah.
I think that's something that those of us who are concerned about climate change, concerned about making systemic changes, that's always something we're coming up against, isn't it? It's like all the messages that we have about how society functions. It's like you have to buy stuff so that other people can have money and they can buy stuff. And yet we have to make some systemic changes about how we're consuming, how much we're consuming, aren't we? And it's something that it's hard, but we're going to have to address it pretty soon, aren't we?
Yeah. Well, I don't know. I feel like if you shifted the consumer behaviour from however many things, I don't know, 4 £12 T-shirts to one £40 something with an independent maker, then that does make a difference, and you have slowed down your consumption rather. I think it's about spending your money with people who kind of more responsible, I guess, and supporting those independent makers and businesses rather than giving your money to people who don't care.
And who already have a really lot of it.
Yes, that's also true.
Yeah. Which brings me to another point, actually, that when you were talking earlier, I just made a little note about price, because, I mean, when I asked you earlier, what do you wish home sewers considered more when they were sourcing their fabric? So a lot of the fabrics that are on your website are more expensive per metre than people might be used to seeing in their local fabric shop, for example.
Yeah.
Obviously, that's something that people are going to have to address. Do you think that people should get used to spending more money on their fabric?
To be honest. And it's the same with everything that we buy in terms of, garments. Unfortunately, we've sort of shifted what potentially we probably would have paid in the 50s. The price points are cheaper than what we would have been paying for a yard of fabric. But that's because we didn't have these kind of mass-produced textiles, which I don't want to go into the history of it all, which I'm sure you know, but they were so good after the war, being able to produce that quantity of textile at that really cheap price was so beneficial for our economy. But what they didn't know was the fact that they didn't biodegrade. And so we just kept producing the same really awful textile in terms of, the environmental impact. And so unfortunately now we've come to a point where we're used to that really awful fabric, it's really bad for the environment, that is £2 a meter, and so we're like, that is the price of fabric. But it's not, that's not a safe, responsible fabric. And I get asked about that a lot. There's a big conversation around how ethical consumption is like a privilege, and only the privileged can afford it. And there is a big conversation about that. But actually, the most ethical thing you can do is not buy anything. And that is also the cheapest thing you can do. So there is an argument to say, actually, it's very affordable to be ethical and eco-friendly, and using what we've got as well, using the fabrics that you already have.
Even if those fabrics are already in the form of existing garments that you're no longer wearing, that's a great source of fabric. And potential start of a project. Going to take a little bit more figuring out and being a bit more creative on how you can use that. But I would think it's a real balance as well, isn't it? Because you can both use your existing clothing and buy some beautiful new fabric that's £25 a meter. Like, it's not either or. Like, there is a real privilege, as you say, of having disposable income. But beyond that, those of us that are, lucky enough to have that, we can explore with these different approaches and create balances that are not just buying the £2 a meter fabric.
Exactly. And once you kind of acclimatize to, actually, I'm not going to buy a new fabric every other day or, every week, I'm going to buy one fabric every month. Suddenly you're like, well, if you add up what you would have spent and then what you then spend, you find actually you have saved money because you have spent more. So it is just a shift in your kind of mindset, and it is, I understand actually, because again, coming out of the war where we were rationed and we didn't have access to all these amazing things. I talked to grandparents about this sort of thing, and they're just like, why would you do that when we have access to so much stuff? And we didn't have that, that availability of all these beautiful things, and they're so cheap. Why wouldn't you just buy it all? So it is really difficult to kind of come to that understanding that actually we need to slow down and we need to stop,
And it's amazing, isn't it, how quick a shift it's been in just like 2 generations to just crazy mindless consumption. But I mean, in a sense, I feel like it's not our fault, because we have been pummeled with messages, and both implicit and, explicit messages that consuming is good, consuming has to happen. It's going to fulfill all these amazing problems, that you've got in your life and your self-esteem and everything. And billions and trillions of pounds have been pumped into those messages. It's like, how could you not be affected,
Yeah, it's really difficult. And actually, that, again, this is a big conversation that happens, who is responsible for changing the way that we consume? Should it be the H&Ms of the world, the fast fashion retailers that don't pay their workers enough and use rubbish materials, or should it be consumers who say, no, I don't want that anymore? And there's no real answer, I guess. But one of the things that I believe is that these big businesses are highly efficient and highly intelligent. So if they see that the rate of consumption is going down, they're not going to continue making the quantity just because, like, it just doesn't work like that. So if we slowed down what we were buying, I think it would drive that kind of consumption down, and it would, stop them from behaving like that.
Yeah. So when you said that, should it be the big businesses? Should it be consumers? And my initial reaction is like, well, both.
Yeah, exactly.
Because we all live on this planet and we've all got agency. Well, those of us who are fortunate enough to have agency, we need to exercise it, because we don't have time not to, really.
Exactly. Yeah.
Fabric production, as we've kind of discussed, does seem like it's such an opaque industry. And the majority of us who've thought about it, we know that it's very damaging to the environment in some way or many ways. And we know that there are workers who grow and produce the fabric and the garments later on. We know that they are being damaged and exploited in numerous ways also. And we'd like to know more about making better choices and sourcing better options. But it is really hard to know where to start, especially if it's not a fabric that's got a specific certification, for example. But you've somehow got behind behind the curtain a bit, haven't you? So you've gathered a lot of insight into better practices and ways to kind of source less damaging products. So like how did you like penetrate the impenetrable?
How did I do that? I did come up against people that didn't want to tell me things, and then I just didn't work with them. So I think I just eventually found people who were like me and are passionate about supporting their local community and want to do things as responsibly as possible. And there's some really amazing behind the scenes conversations about what can we be doing better and how can we improve. But yeah, in terms of that, I just was kind of doggedly just asked loads of questions. And I think that's the only thing you can do if you come up against someone who's not very forthcoming with how they work and things. But even now, you know, like this hand weaving community in the Philippines that we work with, one of the things that, we've been talking about, interestingly, because there is such an issue with price point, is talking about ways that we can reduce the price point without affecting any people in the process. So I would never ask a weaver to take a pay cut or anything like that. But one of the kind of things that we have been looking at is combining different fibers together, because the pineapple fiber is so expensive. And so we were talking about using a Philippine grown cotton, which is like the perfect solution, except we can't get any information from that supplier and that grower of the cotton. And that's so frustrating. You know, even the people who live in that region can't get information from them. So yeah, it's a real, it's a battle, to be honest.
Yeah. So do you personally visit some of these places that are producing fabrics?
Yeah.
So you do a lot of sourcing by literally going to the place and like finding some contacts and walking about?
Yeah. I mean, not so much now. I have to say, now that we've been running for so long, I think one of the things that's really important to us is to continue working with the same people. So it's really important you don't go in with, you know, like a massive order into one community and then you can't sustain the orders. So that's been something that's really important. So we've kind of had a sustainable growth with every supplier that we've worked with. I'm definitely highly sensitive to basically working respectfully with these communities. You know, we have really long kind of conversations around what they feel comfortable doing. And so I would never want to go in and make anyone feel uncomfortable. To be honest, it's really about supporting what they're doing. And if the sale of that fabric supports what they do and they want to do that, then that's what we'll do. And actually, there was a situation where we were getting a lot of interest for some ikats. And we ended up wholesaling some. And for one reason or another, it just didn't work out. And it was just putting way too much pressure on that community. And we just said, this isn't going to work out. And actually, they said it first. And that's just one of the things that you kind of have to respect.
Yeah, that's so reassuring. It's so reassuring as well to know that you've been there and that you've met some of these actual weavers. That's incredible.
Yeah, well, I grew up in Asia. So,
oh, did you?
Yeah, so I feel much more at home in Thailand than I do in London.
Really?
Yeah, so.
Okay, so let's talk about the Sustainable Fashion Collective.
Yes.
Can you tell us what it is?
Yes. So off the back of Offset Warehouse and being kind of one of the first exclusively ethical fabric shops, a couple of years ago, we started getting more and more questions around sustainability and ethical fibers and lots of really difficult questions. Not difficult questions, but questions that are very hard to answer quickly. So we decided that the best way to answer these questions was to put together somewhere that designers and creatives and anyone kind of interested in it could just come and get the answers that they wanted from experts. So we put together this platform, which is now called the Sustainable Fashion Collective. And every month we talk about a different topic. So I think last month we were looking at, actually how to source ethical fabrics. But we go through all sorts of things, like sustainable pattern cutting. So, like zero waste pattern cutting ideas, things like that, to really support businesses and creatives to kind of navigate what is kind of a minefield of terminology and different fibers and all that stuff, so that they can come somewhere and find the answers that they need.
It sounds like you saw a need and you're like, well, we can fill this need because we've got so much information and we know how to get the things we don't know.
Yeah, exactly. And I think for us as well, there is a huge amount of misinformation that is kind of seem to be perpetuating.
And a lot of greenwashing as well.
Yeah, a lot of greenwashing. And as people become more interested in it and really want to kind of help and support this, I just wanted it to be from the voices of experts. So, for example, we had a whole thing about washing fabric, a whole masterclass on, what is the impact of washing a fabric. And we had, a doctor come on and talk about microfiber pollution, someone who's done the research, and he is the one who has done the research on it, and it's like, that's the facts. From his mouth are coming the facts. So, it's things like that. So you just kind of want to, somewhere that, a place to come. And anyway, so we put that together, and then we've got a free kind of level, so people can come and enjoy like the live events and the news articles, things like that. And then we've got a subscription level, which is £31.50 a month. So again, trying to keep it really affordable, and it's been amazing. And again,
that's very exciting. That sounds like opportunity to do so much learning.
Oh yeah, it's, to be honest, it's too much. So much information on there. I think it's like information overload.
Yeah. Speaking of exciting, what are your hopes for your business going forward? For either aspect of your business going forward?
I'd like to be looking at more interesting fibers. And I'd love to be on the kind of the person who's sort of helping those really unusual fibers come to market. I think that's probably where I'd love to see Offset Warehouse kind of grow.
But I think you're already there in a way, aren't you? Because I think your website's the only place I've seen like banana fibers. I've heard of them. I've heard of it elsewhere. But I think your website's the only place I've seen that you can actually buy some.
Yes, yeah. I'd like to see some of the, the carbon dioxide fabrics on there. Things like that, the real kind of
the
ground of these things. Yeah.
What are your hopes for more broadly for textile production going forward? So more interesting fibers.
Yeah. I just would love to see more decisions at government level that prohibit the use of really dangerous textiles. I think I talk about it a lot, and actually it's quite old now, but there's this Greenpeace kind of research paper that they did where they tested garments from the high street. And it's quite old now. So it was from 2012, but they found really hazardous chemicals in quite a large number of the garments that they tested.
Really?
Yeah. And they were from brands like Zara and Victoria's Secret, and brands that we kind of all know and potentially have, items of clothing from. And I don't know, I think there's a lot of malpractice, and I basically don't understand how people can get away with it, And I don't know if you've seen any of the kind of latest, like there are a couple of movies out, like Dark Water. I think it's called Dark Waters. It's about DuPont and how they basically contaminated the world's water supply. And so every glass of, anything we drink has got this fiber in it now. And we have this fiber in us. And it's things like that I don't understand how they got away with it,
Yeah.
And you know what I would love as well? I would love to be able to just go to a shop and just buy anything I wanted because it was all ethical.
Yeah, without all the kind of the questions and concerns.
I'm a nightmare. I need to know. I'm like looking at every label in there. And to be honest, I don't even buy anything anymore because I basically just buy secondhand if I need to buy anything at all.
Yeah.
But that would be nice to just to shop guilt-free and shop for a fabric guilt-free. I mean, that's the dream, isn't it?
Yeah, I know. I even feel the same like fruit and veg. It's like, do I get the organic or do I get like the loose version that doesn't have plastic? Yeah. What's going to be less damaging?
And it's draining.
Yeah, it is such a large part of my brain is taken up with these considerations.
I know.
I want that to have my brain back.
Yeah. Exactly.
Amazing. Thank you, Charlie. Thank you so much for this conversation. It's so fascinating. And I'll put all the links in the show notes to everything we've discussed. And I'm really grateful for your time.
My pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks so much for listening. I really hope you enjoyed this episode and are left feeling inspired. For more info about the podcast, including show notes for this and every episode, head to checkyourthread.com. I'd love to hear from you, so if you have any comments, questions or ideas for future episodes, please get in touch by emailing zoe@checkyourthread.com or find me on Instagram @checkyourthread. Massive thanks to Patrick Potter for production support, to Sylvia Seller for the awesome logo design, and to Simon at Palm Skin Productions for the music. This ad-free podcast would not be possible without listener support, so if you feel you are able, please consider signing up to the Check Your Thread Patreon. For the equivalent of buying me a coffee each month,